On the question of credit cards, by the way, a very important point to be made. The U.S. Operations of Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and others have a prohibition on the use of credit cards for verification for a very specific reason, that credit cards were, in fact, sold and distributed to many people who are therefore underage. But there are also other reasons why they do not believe that a credit card by itself is a sufficient proxy for age. That is a very important point. It's not a sufficient proxy for age. It is a system with lots of weaknesses if just the credit card is used. However, when you use a mix of data, as Nigel Payne mentioned here, and as others have said, and you use state-of-the-art technology, including geolocation, which despite what Mr. Schmidt said here today, which was an technologically incorrect representation of the technology, you can identify up to a very high degree the location of an individual where they are accessing from where they are accessing your site. I'd like to make another point. Many of these arguments are put forward by interested parties who don't want to be inconvenienced by child protection. That should not be taken as a technological argument. Ours is the leading technology in this field, but there are many others. None of us have been surveyed by the opponents of this. The most definitive paper by Adam Tierer includes no data, and he spurned a request to look at the state-of-the-art of online age and ID verification. I put that before you when you're listening to these dramatic tales about how unreliable these systems are.
Thank you. We'll get to the question now. We may have a chance for a couple of rounds. I'm struck here, actually. We talked about age, but it does seem to me, as I listen to the sad stories of some of the younger people who have been involved, that we're not talking about 10 or even 15-year-olds. We're talking about college students. So, first of all, we ought to be clear that the age verification issue seems to me to be secondary in that the sad tales we've heard tend to be young adults. And so whether age verification is good or not good isn't going to resolve the problem of people who are 18 or beyond. And then you do get to the philosophical question. Do you prohibit some adults from doing something because a small number of adults are going to abuse it? But with regard to age verification, I would ask Mr. Schmidt one question. You said that 20% was the failure rate, but then you suggested it would be much higher by comparison because you said the FBI statistics are that in-person failure rates for alcohol and cigarettes are higher than 25%, and therefore it's probably higher on online. How does that square with your citation of the 20% figure?
Mr. Chairman, the 20% number was a general number for both cases. I think you can make a case very strongly that age and ID verification would fail to that level or greater.
Well, no, I guess by my arithmetic, no. If it's 25% for in-person and it averages out to 20%, online must be below 20%. Certainly, because how do you get, if you start with 25% and you wind up at 20, somebody's got to be below 20. But I don't want to bog down too much. I do think we're not talking age verification as a thing. But I would ask you on this. The figures you give, you said it's probably above 25%. That's based on alcohol and cigarettes. Could I ask, do members of the panel think we should ban the sale of alcohol and cigarettes online? Or what's the, Mr. Schmidt, what would you think the incidence is of people underage buying wine or cigarettes online?
I'm not aware of any direct research about incidents.
But you would expect it to be well above 20%.
Well, it's a little different because there's a delivery of a physical product that would increase the rates of success.
How would that
be? A bottle of wine or a pack of cigarettes that should.
You don't think that children? You don't think that
lower
15-year-olds clever enough to get by this couldn't find a place to have the mail delivered?
I would expect it to be lower, probably not dramatically lower, but
I do want to make that point today. My point is this. We have real reasons and reasons that are advanced. I think the real reason for this legislation is that people don't like gambling and don't think other people ought to gamble. I think there is a moral disapproval of gambling. And I should add, I don't gamble. For one thing, I have a short attention span. And you can't gamble if you're thinking about something else. You're going to lose your pants. And that's why I don't gamble. But I don't do a lot of things. And I certainly do not think the world should be restricted to things I like to do. But to the extent that it is age, here is the great inconsistency. I have had people who were strong advocates of this bill, but they're also strong advocates of selling wine over the internet. And it's a clear, it seems to be just a clear contradiction with regard to that, and how people can be for this and talk about underage and continue to support the sale of tobacco and wine. It just seems to me to show that's not the real reason. But let me ask philosophically, because and Reverend Hogan and I sympathize and admire the story you told is of an extremely dedicated parent, the lengths you went to try and be supportive and protective of your son. But would you, if you could, restrict other forms of legal gambling? People can bet on horses, they can go to lotteries, and we have certainly had addicts. Let me say, I've been in public life for 40 years. I've heard stories of addictions to gambling when we considered a lottery in the Massachusetts legislature in the 70s. People said, don't do that. They were addicted gamblers. Casinos, we talk about casino gambling in Massachusetts, again, all in-person gambling. And so the problem of addiction, a sad problem, certainly pre-existed the Internet and continued. Would you personally propose, you said, that gambling is evil, or your son said, would you restrict other forms of gambling that are now legal in the U.S.?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2005, the Media Awareness Network said that 23% of male students in grades 10 and 11 reported visiting a gambling site. So there is a lot of gambling going on underage, and I've known families to do that. In my own personal life, as some people will vote, personally on myself, I would recommend no one to gamble, because
I'm sorry, I appreciate that. So would I, by the way. But the question is, there is a difference between what we individually would do and what we would recommend to others and what we would use the law enforcement mechanism to enforce. Would you, given the prevalence of addiction in other parts of gambling, not just here, or the fact of it, would you legally ban other forms of gambling that are now legal in the U.S., non-internet gambling?
That's your responsibility, not mine.
Well, so is internet gambling. Let me prevent.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was relieved last year when the Congress passed the Internet Gambling Bill because it reinforced the Wire Act of 1961. I was relieved because I knew my son was doing an illegal activity, and yet it seemed like I was powerless to stop him from doing that. We have a principle, I believe, in the government, is that we allow the states to decide these questions, and now you're trying to make the federal government to decide the question.
Well, I guess I would differ with you on this, and I understand. As I said, I admire the length to which you went to work with your son, but the argument is not one of federalism in substance. It is that gambling is wrong and that you get into addictions, and I guess, again, I am not very confident that if you were able to ban all internet gambling, that, well, certainly it's the case that addictive gambling wouldn't go away. Addictive gambling preceded that and would go later. And if we ban internet gambling or increase the effectiveness of the ban on internet gambling because there is addiction, then I don't understand. Again, we got cigarettes and tobacco be sold on the internet. Why don't we shut down all forms of gambling? Because it is certainly the case that there is a wide range of gambling addiction other than that. But my time's expired. The gentleman from Alabama.
Well,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to...
I'm sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm an American Baptist pastor, and the American Baptist denomination has passed a resolution against gambling.
In all forms. Legal gambling.
Warning people against gambling that really is not a profitable aspect of the state government. I used to be employed by a public school district. Our public school district received very little money from the state lottery, but though the lottery was perceived as the panacea for paying for public schools. And I just don't see where gambling is a necessary act.
Well, I appreciate the consistency, and I think that's an honest and consistent answer. But I don't see one for saying, let's restrict internet gambling more, but allow it to go elsewhere. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you.